So what is the future of recycling? Concerns about what our trash is doing to the environment overseas and new laws in China are leading Palo Alto to rethink its waste management. Here to discuss this topic and bring us up to date is Phil Bobel, Assistant Director of Public Works for the City of Palo Alto. Phil, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So we seem to be at a particular point right now. I'm hearing a lot about China, and I kind of wanted to just start off by asking you, is the situation with recycling changing right now? And if so, what's kind of the broad stroke of what's going on?
Well, you're absolutely right. It is changing, and it's a good time to talk about it. We can start with China because they took a very specific action. They have established a standard of 0.5% contamination, meaning if it's greater than that, 0.5% of whatever it is, that is, then they're not going to take it.
Okay.
And so our hauler in Palo Alto is called Green Waste, a little bit confusing. That name gets used for a number of things, but that's the company that hauls our stuff, recycling, compost, and old-fashioned garbage off-site, right? So the main response is we're just not taking anything to China right now because it's too risky. We meet that standard sometimes, but we don't meet it all the time. And if our hauler Green Waste were to take it there and get it rejected, that's a big problem.
That's costly.
Yeah, it's costly. Yeah. And we don't want to have stuff rejected at places anyway. So we're redirecting that material, and we can talk about that. But that's been our major initial response. But you're absolutely right that there's a change going on, and we can expect other Asian countries to follow suit and have tough standards. But for the moment, we've shifted taking what's called mixed paper, all that paper basically of various types except cardboard. We've shifted that, not taking it to China, but we are taking it to other Asian countries as an immediate response. Now, we're not wild about doing that, so we're trying to find domestic markets, as we call them, US markets for the stuff. But we know that just finding a market in the United States isn't really good enough because that market could be a vendor who's going to sell it to someone, and it could end up out of our control and in an Asian country anyway. So there's a lot of work ahead of us, just trying to figure out where does this stuff really go. The second thing I'll mention is plastics, because plastics, we're going to China, and for the moment, we've found domestic markets for it. But again, we're not absolutely sure that it's staying in this country and not going to Asia or somewhere else as a second or third step. So there's work ahead to sort all this out.
I don't think I realized how great of a partnership, you could say, sending things over to China, has been. Like, I didn't realize that so much stuff had gone over, but it was the main receiver.
Well, it was the main receiver for what we call mixed paper, which is a huge amount of the total, and mixed plastics, which is a huge amount of the total. The 1 and 2, the plastic that's marked 1 and 2.
The little triangle.
Little triangle says 1, says 2, and this is principally plastic water bottles and stuff that look like plastic water bottles. That has had a domestic market for some time. But again, we're not positive that that stuff was actually staying in the country. So we've got some investigative work there as well.
How come there aren't any domestic markets? Is it not profitable, or?
It's the same reason that printed circuit boards went overseas and, labor rates are cheaper, everything's cheaper, right? So that's the basic answer. It's less expensive to deal with it in Asia than it is here. And what that's resulted in is we don't have enough processing facilities here now. So even if we wanted to, these processing facilities can't just grow up overnight. We're hoping that the fact that the standards in Asia are getting tougher, will encourage entrepreneurs to create processing facilities here and be able to keep it where we can feel good about what's happening to it.
I should mention that Palo Alto has been a leader in recycling rates and diversion rates. 90%, I think, is the target. Is that correct?
We have a target actually of 95% by 2030,
Okay.
and 90% by 2020, which
That's
is coming
right.
right up. So
Yeah.
we have two targets, and we're really sort of focused on that 95% one in 2030 now.
Okay.
So that's our goal. We're at
Yeah.
about 80%, and you're right that exceeds what most cities are up to, but we're aiming higher.
Yeah, yeah. And then this is a complicating factor, it sounds like, how to keep the diversion rate up and just ensure that whatever is happening to our recyclables is positive.
Exactly.
So purity being an issue, I was reading in Veronica Weber's story that there's a number of different processes that are used. Can we talk a little bit about manual sorting and machines that are sorting the materials right now? What's happening to our recyclables after we put it in the blue bin?
Yeah, so you put something in the blue bin, and in Palo Alto, it goes to a facility on Charles Street that I think Veronica visited, where it is sorted. And you're absolutely right, it's a combination of manual and sort of semi-automatic, I'd call it, sorting. More and more, our hauler, Green Waste, who also manages this sorting facility, is trying hard. I'd say they're really at the cutting edge. If there's a new process, an automatic process that will sort something, they pretty much jump on it and get it at their Charles Street location. So we feel good that they're on the cutting edge of sorting, but if you go there, you see an awful lot of manual stuff going on, especially at the front end. It comes in, and the big things, the best way is to grab them and put them in the right location. Somebody has a big plastic bucket. Well, that is plastic, and it can be recycled, but it's not going to do too well on this sorting line coming through. So something big like that has to be removed. And then I'll just say one thing about plastic bags. We've banned certain types of plastic bags, but there's still a lot of what we call plastic film that comes in. Big sheets of plastic. Everything's been shrink wrapped in plastic now. So it's not just bags, it's all this plastic you get. And as you can imagine, and your article I think shows, the pictures show this happening, you get this plastic coming in on a line, and you can imagine it doesn't do too well. It wraps itself around all the machinery. There's one of these types of machines where we have to shut the machine down several times a day and pull the plastic off of it because it's wrapped itself around the gears and the wheels. And so that's one type of contamination that China reacts to. And the other type of contamination is what I call food contamination, where there's too much wet material on it. And it's really water that's the killer more than the food. But most food is wet, right? And so the combination of water, drinks, food, China considers that contamination, as well as just a different product, like that plastic film getting in with the paper.
Yeah.
That's bad.
Yeah.
So both of those types of contamination sort of count against these new standards that are going to be coming everywhere.
Yeah. There's some lessons here for residents, isn't there? Things we should and should not be tossing out.
Yeah.
How we should be treating it before we toss it out.
Yeah, since I stumbled onto plastic bags, if you don't mind,
ahead.
I'll give you what we'd like residents to do with all this plastic film. We can deal with it if folks take the plastic film and plastic bags, not the real crinkly stuff, not stuff that's made up of partly a metallic surface like a chip bag and partly cellulose product. Not that stuff, but the pure plastic, easily malleable stuff. Take all that and pack it in one plastic bag, tie it off, and then those sorters at the front end of our line can see it, it's big enough, and they can remove it and we can actually recycle that stuff. What we can't recycle is what I was describing earlier. When it comes in singly, a hunk of it comes in and it wraps itself around the machinery, or it doesn't. They just have to take that and throw it in our landfill pile, right? So what we ask is, yes, we can recycle that stuff if you bag it, but if you don't bag it, it just creates a big headache for us.
Yeah, so these little bits of plastic, the shrink wrap that you're talking about, we should actually think before we just throw it into the recycling. Thinking
Yes,
it's a plastic.
Don't throw it by itself into the blue bin. If you don't have enough of it to do what I said about creating a big ball of it, you don't have enough of it, then it's best to just put it in the black bin.
Yeah. One thing that I learned was that manufacturers are making some kind of hybrid, like plastic paper products, or you were just mentioning some metallics. So I imagine that there's new materials that just don't fit neatly into this is a paper, this is a plastic.
You're right.
Kind of category
So
these
20
days.
years ago, we didn't have these mixed products that had multiple types of either fibers or metal, and so that causes us a real problem. As you can imagine, it's just very hard it's not really possible to recycle something that's made up of multiple types of materials. So stuff like that, chip bags is a good example with that little metal. A lot of them have, not all. Some of them are purely paper, like some of the, some chips, potato chips
The
do
organic
come.
chip type.
Yes, especially, they seem to do a good job, right? The organic ones.
Yeah.
Yep.
I wanted to ask about the economics of the whole enterprise, because I'm not really sure that I understand whether or not recycling has ever been profitable. It sounds like there's a decline right now, but can you tell us about before and sort of now?
Yeah, I'd say overall, considering all types of stuff that we've been recycling in Palo Alto, it was never really profitable.
Okay.
But certain types were and still are. The best example, of course, is aluminum. That aluminum cans, we can separate them with an automatic process that's pretty good, and it's an expensive, aluminum's expensive, right? And aluminum ore, when you think about it, here you've got a can that's basically 100% aluminum, and if they're mining it, what are they down to now? 3% ore that contains 3% aluminum or something. Same thing for iron. So these have good markets. And so metals in general do. Cardboard is decent, but everything else is a struggle. And on balance, it costs money to recycle. And it really always did.
And are those costs going to go up, or we're not
They're
really
going to
sure
go
right
up.
now?
They're going to go up. And one reason is standards getting tougher, and we having to process it more carefully, run awareness programs like we're doing right now, hopefully, where people realize that this contamination issue is real, and it's going to cause us to have to do more processing if we can't get residents to avoid the contamination.
I was going to ask, it seems like there's no uniform process. So what are other cities doing? How are they handling it? Because I know some cities you can throw everything together, some you have to separate it out.
Yeah, and I have to apologize, sort of, for the fact that communities are different, because it really, we understand that's very problematic for residents. You visit somebody's house in another city and you want to do the right thing, but their recycling is a little bit different. So on the one hand, I apologize for that, but on the other hand, we are at a crossroads here of trying to figure out how to do all this. And different cities are experimenting with different ideas. And that experimental sort of nature is helpful, but it's hard on residents. So we have these countywide groups, a countywide group that tries to keep the county together as much as possible, but then does recognize when somebody's going to do a pilot. Like we did a pilot for a while a couple of years ago where we tried just 2 cans instead of 1. And so stuff like that is going to happen, and it's a positive thing. It has a positive and a negative, right?
Yeah, it seems like right now that if there's a lot of different cities trying different things, and maybe someone's going to hit on a good process.
Right.
You know.
That's the hope.
Yeah. So is the state going to get involved at all in this issue with China's laws and cities sending things to Southeast Asian countries? Is this a a state level issue, or is this just cities need to kind of figure it out?
Well, the state hasn't been, there's a state agency called Cal Recycle. This is their area. And they're struggling too. And they haven't really figured out how to help cities. I would just leave it at that. So we're not getting help from them yet.
Okay. So Palo Alto, what's the city of Palo Alto doing as it looks at this issue and the future of recycling? Are there programs that Palo Alto is willing to try, already trying?
Well, here's something that we're doing sort of immediately as one response. We talked about these two types of contamination. And it's, like I said, we're not taking stuff to China because of their standard, but we're recognizing that, hey, everybody is going to have standards and they're going to get tougher. So in response to that, and maybe if we do a good job, the China market will open back up for us too. That's a possibility. So for all of those reasons, we've got a campaign going right now to do clean recycling, I think is what we're calling it. Meaning that, hey, at the resident level and the business level, there is something you can do about this contamination thing. There's two basic things you can do. One is try really hard to put things in the right container of our three containers, right? Recycling, composting, and garbage. Because the most fundamental kind of contamination is that it's in the wrong bin. And there's still an awful lot of that. We've actually got an enforcement program now for businesses, not residents, but we're sending them nasty letters and actually fining them if we have to. So far, the nasty letters are working pretty well and the site visits, but...
Are you seeing more recycling ending up in trash or more trash ending up in recycling?
Well, it's sort of both, and the worst part is that the compost, what is wet, is ending up in the recycling. Because the worst thing that can happen is to get water on the paper.
Okay. If we take nothing else away from this conversation, don't get water on paper.
Don't get water on paper. Don't get food or water into the recycling container. Because even if you don't have any paper in that particular load, it's going in our truck, right? And so if you get water and food in your blue bin, and then it gets into our truck, it's going to essentially ruin some of that paper. And that's one of the types of contamination that China and the other countries and ourselves in a domestic market would worry about. So that's one thing that can be done by residents, and it's just sorting stuff better. And the second thing is we do need to clean out better the containers before we put them in the bin. So some people are doing the right thing. They're putting the cans and bottles in that blue container, but they've got too much liquid or food on them. So for example, you see this all the time. Somebody's got a water bottle, it's half full of water. They know that water bottles can be recycled, so they fire the thing into the blue bin.
Yeah.
But it had water in it. That's going to get crushed, and it's going to spoil the paper. So so our campaign says pour, scrape, wipe. You don't have to do all three of those things, but think about it. If it's liquid, pour it out. If it's something you can scrape out with a spatula, do that. Try reasonably hard. You don't have to spend an hour on it, but spend a few seconds and use a spatula and get it out of the container.
Yeah.
Or if a spatula doesn't work too well and you can wipe it with a paper towel, hopefully that you've used for something else, right? You've been using this paper towel and you were going to compost it anyway because it's wet. We don't want wet things in the blue bin. So a wet paper towel that's been used to wipe out goes in the compost. And we've been at this campaign for a couple months now, and the only scary thing to me was some of our real recyclers were going overboard and rinsing or washing their stuff. We don't want that because that uses precious water, and that's bad. So we just want it poured, scraped, or wiped, not rinsed and washed.
Okay.
So now I've given my pitch for what residents can do to help us out.
Excellent, excellent. Well, this has been a really helpful discussion. I wanted to just ask you, is there anything else that you want to mention, either that the city's doing or about the situation we're in right now before we sign off?
Well, the one thing, just to close on this uncertainty about where the recyclables are ending up. Some of our residents in Palo Alto have brought this to a head, which is good. And so we've made it a requirement of our hauler, Green Waste, to give us an annual report now on where the stuff is ending up. Green Waste has said, this is going to be really challenging. And we said, yeah, we know, but starting this July, a couple months away, we want to start this annual report process. We want them to dig as deep as they can, and we'll help them. And let's figure out, for example, our mixed paper is going to several Asian countries. Let's follow up on that, see if we can figure out what's happening. You'll recall that a couple decades ago, there was a big issue with electronic stuff going to Asia, and young children sorting it out, distilling mercury off of, bad things were happening. Now, this isn't hazardous waste, so we won't have that issue with like mercury, but it could be a social or issue in some other country. And our residents have sort of demanded that we figure that out. We won't figure it all out this first year in July, but now we've got a process, and each year we'll get better and better at figuring out where this stuff is going.
And this is the first time that this has been tracked, really?
Yes, and we aren't aware of any other cities that have tried hard to do this.
Okay. All right. Well, we will look forward to that report and see what's going on. Phil, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me.
That wraps up this edition of Behind the Headlines. If you want to stay abreast of this topic and other local news, you can sign up for Express, which is our daily newsletter. It's free, and you can go to paloaltoonline.com/express to sign up for that. We'll see you next week.